Hi, I'm Steve Towns, Deputy Chief Content Officer for eRepublic. Welcome to our virtual meeting. Today I'm with two public sector technology experts from Cisco. Steve Caimi is an industry solutions specialist with the company. He's focused on the public sector. Steve has more than 20 years of experience in information security, computer networking, and telecommunications. And also with me is Peter Romness. He's a business development manager with Cisco focused on cybersecurity. He's spent almost 30 years helping government customers use technology to achieve their missions. Gentlemen, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Steve.
So we're here to discuss a topic that seemingly grows more challenging for government agencies every day, and that's cybersecurity. We've seen ransomware attacks increasingly target government agencies, and the sophistication of these threats continues to rise. So at the end of 2020, for example, we learned of a significant intrusion into federal systems. Steve and Peter, what does that particular attack say about how cyber threats are evolving, and what should state and local governments take away from it?
Hey, Steve, that's a really interesting question. And the first thought that came to my head when you asked that was, the idea of evolving and things. And at first, I look at this and I see, a lot of times in cybersecurity, we think about, threats as coming either from like the outside, right, nation states, like directly impacting our organization, or sometimes, we think about, insider threats, individuals who, get untrustworthy or what have you, right, commit crimes from the inside. But a lot of times it's easy to lose sight of all the trusted relationships that, state and local governments have with vendors and suppliers and service providers. And I think, this attack kind of brought that, back to the surface. I don't think it's necessarily it's an evolution, right? We've known for a long time that, trusted relationships, supply chain, is a way that organizations can be breached. But I think it kind of, renews the focus on these kinds of things, right? And state and local governments should, learn a lesson, from that, right? To renew their focus on things like, service provider relationships and so forth.
Yeah, for a long time, we've been focusing on how we can protect how state and local governments can protect their networks with technical means and with training their employees and things like that. And there's always been this need to ask the same questions of our suppliers. But that's kind of bubbled back up to the top now. It's become more important. And it's this renewed focus that I think we're going to see start happening. And really, people shouldn't feel bad about this. Even with the NIST cybersecurity framework, when they came back on their first revision, 1.1, they added supply chains security into it. So, don't feel bad. Everybody's doing it. It's kind of the way we look at it.
So government agencies, like organizations all over, rapidly adopted remote work and digital service delivery due to COVID-19. What do you guys think are the lasting impacts from these shifts on their overall cybersecurity posture?
I definitely see that, there's been an acceleration. It's almost like the pandemic slammed the accelerator pedal, right? Remote work is really nothing new in state and local government. It's not really new anywhere, but who expected, something to come along like this and to make it happen practically overnight? And then you have, the separate push into things like, digital service delivery that, really slammed the accelerator pedal on things like, food delivery and e-commerce and curbside pickup. And, a lot of those things, now that the pandemic has gone on for, getting close to a year, we found ourselves with like significant behavior changes, right? And I think, citizens are going to expect more and more out of, government, to be more efficient. Like, I jokingly point out, like, who wants to stand in line, especially at like a DMV anymore, right? There's, digital transformation that can occur here to make everything more efficient.
Yeah, and citizens are getting used to the idea of doing things online. And so, the more that state and local governments can accommodate that, the better they will look to their constituents. And then, of course, then you got to think about how do we secure all of that. And that's where all of this other stuff starts to come in.
So And following up on that, how do best practices for cybersecurity need to change, because of these shifts and emerging threats?
When we talk about things like the basics of security, confidentiality, integrity, availability, like all of these things need to be the same no matter whether remote workers are working remotely, however citizens experience their government. So when we take a look at a lot of this, sometimes it's worth it to kind of look at some of these new trends in cybersecurity, things that have terminology like zero trust. A lot of times we hear this word being thrown around. NIST came out, what was it, Peter, last calendar year, 2020, I think it was, where, they came out with a special publication, 800-207 on the zero trust architecture. And they sought to kind of like separate out the FUD from what zero trust actually means. And basically what they're saying is that zero trust is about securing like all communication, no matter where in the network it resides, right? For a long time, we've been understanding that there really isn't much of a perimeter anymore, and we certainly shouldn't associate something being inside with being secure. But it goes a little bit further, right? It goes about things like securing things on a per session basis. The fact that there's no inside the network, but there's also no earning trust, right? Each and every single time that you need to go and access a resource, you need to prove yourself trustworthy through things like authentication and authorization. It has to be dynamic, right? So when we take a look at these principles of zero trust, and we take a look at it against the backdrop of a lot of the cybersecurity challenges of today, I think there's a lot for state and local government, to learn.
Yeah, and zero trust is a huge thing in the market right now, and I think it'd be fair to say that every customer that I talk to, state, local, federal, anywhere in government, they are talking about zero trust right now. And it's not something that you just turn on or turn off. It's a way of looking at things. It's one of my peers likes to call it a lifestyle choice. But it's a thing that it helps guide your decisions. It's the whole idea that there isn't this implicit trust. It's every time you want to access a new resource, you or a device, that trust has to be proven. And then that trust has to continually be checked to make sure that nothing has changed. And you apply that both internal and external. There's no inside the network anymore. There's no outside the network. It's every connection needs to be checked. And that's where this whole idea of zero trust comes from. And when you start applying it to all of the things that are happening in the world, it tends to fit very well.
And finally, what questions should government leaders ask their vendors and their partners to ensure their systems are secure and stay that way?
Yeah, I remember we talked about that renewed focus on trusted relationships, supply chain, and things like that. And when you take and apply those zero trust principles, that means the vendors and partners that you contract with, we can't consider them trustworthy all the time either.
You
right?
just
So we're
can't assume it.
Yeah, I mean, you have a great reputation yesterday, but that matters absolutely nothing today, right? We have to constantly reevaluate, the changing conditions. We have to constantly prove authentication, authorization. We have to look against the backdrop of the current environment, and so forth. So some of the questions, whenever you think about doing business with a new, whether it's a cybersecurity vendor, whether it's a service provider, ask questions, things like, first of all, like, what are your data protection and privacy policies? You want to get to the heart of how the organization itself protects its own data. You're going to do business with that vendor, you're going to hand over a lot of important information about your agency. So how do they handle it? How do they update that policy? Another thing to ask is, how do you ensure transparency, with us? When you're talking to a vendor, and you want to understand if things go wrong, and things do, right? What kind of responsibility do they take? How do they communicate with you that things are, that there's something that's gone wrong and what they need to do about it, right? You need to make sure that your vendor is clear and upfront, with you. And I think of like two other questions, right? One of them is, how do you kind of build and maintain trustworthy solutions? If you have any kind of technology in your environment, whether it's delivered from the cloud or what have you, it's affecting, the state and local government citizens' data, right? It has highly protected information. So we have to find out and understand how they build security into the systems they're protecting, right? And then finally, how do you hold yourself accountable, right? When mistakes come along, we talked a little about with that transparency. How do you go about making it right? This is not meant to be an exhaustive list of things, but it's really putting the pressure, on vendors and suppliers to be upfront with you about how they handle and treat data and how they go about making things right, when things go wrong.
You're putting a lot of trust in this vendor. And it's up to them to provide clear answers to these things. Even before you ask them, they should be telling you, this is our trust and security policies. Here's how we handle these things. And they need to be a strong enough vendor to stand up to them if something does go wrong. Do they run away, or do they point fingers, or do they run in trying to help you?
And Peter, we do that here at Cisco, right? Trust.cisco.com. Like we put all that information out there to make sure that Cisco can earn its trust, right, from state and local governments and really all of our customers. Like we aspire, right, and hold ourselves accountable, to making sure that we treat information properly and we're clear, with our customers up front.
Well, Steve, Peter, thanks so much for the conversation. These are such important issues. I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
I appreciate the time, Steve.